A college professor with no military training was handed the far left end of the entire Union Army. If his line broke, the whole army could be rolled up from the side and destroyed. His orders were 3 words long: hold at all hazards. His men fought until they had fired their last cartridge. Then, with nothing left to shoot, he ordered them to fix bayonets and charge straight down the hill. The charge broke the enemy, saved the flank, and helped turn the greatest battle ever fought in North America. This is the deep dive of Joshua Chamberlain, and the day a schoolteacher held the end of the line. To understand Little Round Top, you first have to understand the man who was not supposed to be there. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was born in 1828 in Brewer, Maine. He was a quiet, religious, studious man who overcame a childhood stammer through sheer discipline. He became a professor at Bowdoin College, teaching rhetoric and modern languages. He could read and speak 9 languages, but he had never fired a shot in anger. When the Civil War broke out, Bowdoin did not want to lose its star professor. So in 1862, Chamberlain asked for a leave of absence to study languages in Europe. Instead of sailing to Europe, he walked into a recruiting office and joined the army. He was offered command of a regiment outright, and he turned it down. He said he wanted to learn the trade of a soldier before he led men into battle. He accepted the rank of lieutenant colonel instead, second in command of a brand new regiment. That regiment was the 20th Maine. The men of the 20th Maine were farmers, fishermen, lumbermen, and sailors from the coast and woods of Maine. For the first year, they saw hard marching and disease more than glory. By the summer of 1863, Chamberlain had been promoted to full colonel and given command of the regiment. And that summer, the war came north. General Robert E. Lee had taken his Confederate army out of Virginia and into Pennsylvania. He was hunting for a decisive victory on northern soil, one that might end the war. The 2 great armies collided almost by accident at a small crossroads town called Gettysburg. The fighting began on July 1st, 1863, and went badly for the Union on the first day. But the Union Army fell back into a strong position south of the town. That position was shaped like a fishhook, running along ridges and hills. The barb of the hook was anchored on 2 hills, and the long shank ran south down Cemetery Ridge. At the very southern end of that line stood 2 rocky hills called the Round Tops. The smaller one, Little Round Top, was the key to the whole position. Whoever held it looked down on the entire Union line. And on the morning of July 2nd, almost no one was defending it. As Confederate forces massed to attack the Union left, the hills sat nearly empty. A Union engineer, General Gouverneur Warren, rode to the summit and saw the danger. He saw Confederate troops moving into position to seize the undefended hill. Warren sent desperate riders to pull any troops he could find onto Little Round Top. One brigade that answered was commanded by Colonel Strong Vincent. Vincent rushed his 4 regiments up the back slope of the hill and into line just minutes before the attack. He placed the 20th Maine at the very end of that line. That meant Chamberlain and his men were now the extreme left flank of the entire Army of the Potomac. There was no one beyond them, nothing but open ground and the side of the hill. Vincent rode to Chamberlain and gave him the order that would define his life. He said this was the left of the Union line, that it must be held at all hazards, and that the 20th Maine could not withdraw under any condition. Chamberlain understood exactly what that meant. If his regiment broke, Confederate troops would pour around the end of the army and attack it from behind. He had perhaps 350 men to hold that ground. Coming up the hill against him were the soldiers of the 15th Alabama. They were led by Colonel William Oates, a tough and capable commander. But Oates's men were exhausted and desperately thirsty. They had marched more than 20 miles that day in the July heat. They had sent men to find water just before the attack, and those men never made it back in time. So the Alabamians climbed the rocky, wooded slope tired, parched, and into a wall of fire. The first Confederate charge hit the 20th Maine and was thrown back. Then another came, and another. The fighting was at close range among the boulders and trees, sometimes hand to hand. Oates tried to slip men around the end of Chamberlain's line to get behind him. Chamberlain saw the move and made a decision that probably saved his regiment. He stretched his line thinner and bent the far end of it backward, like folding a door. His regiment now stood in a V shape, refusing the flank, so the Confederates could not get around it. The Alabamians charged this bent line again and again. Chamberlain later said the ground was covered with the dead and wounded of both sides. A third of his men were down, officers were falling, and then his men began to realize they were running out of ammunition. They scavenged cartridges from the cartridge boxes of the dead and the wounded. Soon even that was nearly gone. Another Confederate charge was forming at the base of the hill. Chamberlain knew his men could not survive it by standing still and firing, because they had almost nothing left to fire. So he made the decision that would become legend. He ordered his regiment to fix bayonets. The plan was audacious. The left wing of the regiment would swing forward like a gate, sweeping down and across the slope. The whole line would charge downhill into the surprised Confederates. Chamberlain gave the order, and the 20th Maine came down off the hill with the bayonet. The exhausted Alabamians, expecting the defenders to be nearly finished, were stunned by the sudden charge. Their line broke, many threw down their weapons, many were captured on the spot. Colonel Oates ordered a retreat, and his men streamed back down the hill. The charge swept the slope clear and captured a large number of prisoners. The extreme left of the Union Army had held. Little Round Top remained in Union hands. The flank that could have unraveled the whole army was secure. Historians still debate exactly how decisive that single stand was to the outcome of the battle. But the image of it, a teacher and his farmers charging downhill with empty rifles, became one of the most famous moments in American history. Gettysburg itself was the turning point of the war in the East, and Lee retreated back to Virginia. He would never again threaten the North the way he had that summer. For Chamberlain, Little Round Top was only the beginning. He fought on through the brutal final years of the war. He was wounded several times, and at Petersburg in 1864, he was shot through the body and not expected to live. General Ulysses Grant promoted him to brigadier general on the spot, believing it was a deathbed promotion. But Chamberlain survived and returned to the army. In April of 1865, the Confederacy collapsed and Lee surrendered at Appomattox. Chamberlain was given a place of high honor. He was chosen to command the Union troops, who would formally receive the surrender of the Confederate infantry. As the defeated Confederate soldiers marched up to lay down their flags and weapons, Chamberlain did something no one ordered him to do. He called his own men to attention and had them salute the surrendering enemy. He later called it honor answering honor. It was an act of respect for a beaten foe, and it became one of the most remembered gestures of the entire war. After the war, the quiet professor came home a hero. He was elected governor of Maine 4 times. He served as president of his old college, Bowdoin. In 1893, 30 years after the battle, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his defense of Little Round Top. But the war never fully let him go. The wound he took at Petersburg never properly healed and caused him pain for the rest of his life. He died in 1914. And many believe that old wound finally killed him. He is sometimes called the last man to die of wounds from the Civil War, half a century after he was shot. The story of Little Round Top grew larger with time. A celebrated novel and a famous film put Chamberlain and the bayonet charge at the emotional center of Gettysburg. Some historians have pushed back, noting that other units fought just as hard on that hill, and that no single regiment wins a battle alone. All of that is true. Little Round Top was held by many men, and many of them died unremembered. But what makes Chamberlain endure is not just the charge. It is that a man who taught languages for a living, who had never seen combat a year before, stood at the end of the line and refused to let it break. He was given an impossible order and 3 words to live by, and he found a way to obey them when his ammunition ran out. That is why a college professor from Maine is still remembered on a rocky hill in Pennsylvania. Which Civil War story should we deep dive next? Tell us in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and always don't let history be forgotten.